We had a great annual meeting this year with the Interfaith Council of Contra Costa County, mostly because we were able to recognize our Making a Difference awardees, but also because of this keynote speech by Reverend Victor Kazanjian, Executive Director of the United Religions Initiative in San Francisco. And as you'll hear, the Interfaith Council of Contra Costa County was one of the first cooperation circles of URI. Check them out at uri.org.
Greetings, sisters and brothers of I4C. And thank you so much, Carolyn, Will, members of the governing board and elected council, and all members of the Interfaith Council of Contra Costa County for inviting me to speak with you this evening. The Interfaith Council is now one of almost 1,100 URI cooperation circles in 110 countries around the world. As the Interfaith Council was one of URI's first cooperation circles at its founding in 2000, it's a particular honor for me to be with you this evening for your annual meeting. On behalf of URI, we also offer our congratulations to the Interfaith Council's Making a Difference awardees, as well as to the newly elected members of the elected council and the governing board. The Interfaith Council's work through extraordinary programs like Interfaith Election Healing, Meaningful Monday, Confronting Systemic Racism Together, and I-Care reflects the extraordinary work being done by I4C and URI's cooperation circles around the world, working to make a difference in their communities. Thank you for all your important work, and particularly in these most challenging times. We are certainly living in such a complicated time in this country and in our world. These past 4 years and these past 4 days have tested and tried the heart and soul of America. Mostly I have found myself deeply sad, angry at times, but mostly sad about the loss of life, livelihood, liberties, human rights, equal rights, civility, rationality, perspective, connection, and community. The loss of trust in elected officials and political and judicial systems, and the apparent loss of the dream of a unified, beloved community. That's a lot of loss. And this loss transcends political affiliation. That much loss is traumatic for individuals, communities, and societies. And the resulting trauma, which is similar to that of growing up in a household with a violently abusive parent, if left untreated, leads to sickness and psychosis. We are living in a traumatized country, rife with social sickness and societal psychosis that is evoking alienation and isolation, leading some to despair and depression, and others to fear and rage. This social sickness has been provoked by, and I would say carefully crafted, by a group of anti-democracy politicians who believe this to be the way to manipulate enough of the general population for their own selfish ends. There is precedent for this. It is straight out of the dictator's playbook in places like Nazi Germany, British ruled India, and apartheid South Africa. As a grandchild of the Armenian genocide, it would be a betrayal of my family's legacy if I were to fail to speak to this rise of totalitarianism in the United States, a situation that has historically preceded mass atrocities and even genocides around the world. The common theme of these moments of madness, historical and contemporary, is the manipulation of people who have experienced great loss. This manipulation works because when grief goes unattended, that grief then becomes grievance, grief to grievance. And it is grievance that then is manipulated. In our country, our grief from the losses we feel has turned to grievance for many, and it is that which we must address if we are to begin a process towards healing and transformation. What has struck me as particularly important in this time of history for our work of peace building and justice seeking in interfaith movements such as URI and I4C is that the power behind our work is less about politics and strategy than it is about relationships, connection, and consciousness. After 3 decades of work as a community organizer, educator, and grassroots activist, I have become convinced that without the power provided by love, compassion, and empathy, the most sophisticated strategies for social change are but hollow branches bracing against the furious winds of injustice and violence. Alienation, isolation, fear, and rage are what fuels violence, and violence against people or planet requires dehumanization and objectification. We know this in both interpersonal and geopolitical contexts. To harm you, to violate your humanity, I must first dehumanize you, turning you into an object to be used for my ends. That has been the whole strategy behind the Trump movement, to dehumanize large portions of the population of this country and the world, so that his followers will not consider the humanity of others, and will objectify the earth so that they can continue to rape and pillage the planet. Therefore, I would submit that the essential component of all interfaith peace building and justice seeking is the rehumanizing, de-objectifying power of love, compassion, and empathy. In spiritual terms, it is making sacred, once again, that which has been desecrated. Dr. Howard Thurman, mystic and teacher in the African American Christian tradition, and my spiritual mentor, speaks to this process in this poem about wholeness. He writes, "There is a sense of wholeness at the core of humanity that must abound in all we do, that marks with reverence our every step, that has its sway when all else fails, that wearies out all evil things, that warms the depths of frozen fears, making friend of foe, and lasts beyond the living and the dead, beyond the goals of peace, the ends of war. This we seek through all our years, to be complete and of one piece within and without. Weary out all evil things, warm the depths of frozen fears, make friend of foe, seek to be complete and of one piece within and without." That is what we are challenged to do today. To go beyond familiar conversations about the divisions of red and blue states and changing the political landscape through merely instrumental means, and open, gently open to the places of loss, pain, and grief, with actions that are based on the values of love, compassion, and empathy, and are rooted in the spiritual principles that ground our common life on this planet. Albert Einstein spoke of such a process. He wrote these words reflecting on the death of a child, of a dear friend. "A human being is spatially and temporally limited piece of the whole world, what we call the universe. That person experiences themselves, their thoughts and feelings as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of their consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison, restricting us from our own desires and affection to a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion, to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. The quest for liberation," he writes, "from this bondage is the only object of true religion." This then is our task. It starts by cultivating meaningful and connected human relationships in which people of different backgrounds, whether this be cultural, religious, political, gender, or any identity-based, forge strong bonds of connection and become living witnesses to the power of love, compassion, and empathy, to heal great loss and create cultures and communities of peace, justice, and healing. This is what we do in URI. Nurture circles of peace, justice, and healing in which people create and sustain daily, enduring interfaith and intercultural relationships based on principles like equity, hospitality, kindness, compassion, empathy, and love. This is what you do in I4C. In the face of the trauma of the last days, months, and years, in the face of the trauma of decades and indeed centuries of injustice that has disproportionately dehumanized women, people of color, ethnic and religious minorities, indigenous peoples, members of the LGBTQIX community, in the face of the trauma that we continue to inflict upon the earth, in the face of the trauma of the losses that we each carry in our bodies and souls, let us follow Thurman's call to wholeness and Einstein's call for liberation from bondage by widening our circles of compassion for all humanity, for all living beings, and for the earth, our mother, and to seek completeness within and without. If we in the interfaith movement do this, then this movement of which we are a part will be fully energized to transform a struggling world into a truer reflection of the wholeness that lies at the center of all creation. My sisters and brothers, may the power of love infuse purpose into our actions, that we may be part of expanding the reality of the peace that we know in our hearts to this precious planet and its beloved inhabitants. May peace prevail in your community. May peace prevail on earth.